In the heart of the known world, a city stood as a bastion of civilization. For over 1,000 years, it was the queen of cities, the jewel of the East, the center of an empire that saw itself as the heir to Rome. This was Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, a beacon of faith, culture, and power, protected by God and by stone. Its markets overflowed with silk and spice, its churches shimmered with gold mosaics, and its libraries held the accumulated wisdom of antiquity. The city was a legend, a fortress deemed impregnable. Its strength was not merely symbolic. Encircling the city on its landward side were the Theodosian walls, the most formidable defensive fortifications ever conceived by man. A triple line of ramparts, moats, and towers that had repelled countless armies for a millennium. These were not just walls. They were a declaration of permanence, an earthly shield for the last remnant of the Roman Empire. But empires, like men, have their seasons. And a new power was rising in the East, hungry and ambitious. The walls had stood for 1,000 years. Until now. He was a man forged in the crucible of ambition, a scholar, a warrior, a leader possessed by a singular, all-consuming dream. Sultan Mehmed II, ruler of the ascendant Ottoman Empire, was only 21 years old. Yet his gaze was fixed on the prize that had eluded his ancestors, Constantinople. To conquer, it was to fulfill an Islamic prophecy, to secure his legacy, and to shift the very axis of global power. For Mehmed, the city was not just a strategic objective, it was his destiny, and he would bring the full, terrifying force of a new age to bear upon the old. The preparations were monumental, a testament to Mehmed's iron will. From across his vast domains, an army of unimaginable size began to gather a force estimated at over 80,000 elite soldiers, janissaries, and irregulars. They were a tide of steel and faith, marching toward the ancient capital. But this was not to be a siege of old. Mehmed had harnessed the most terrifying weapon of the 15th century, gunpowder. He commissioned a Hungarian engineer named Orban to forge cannons of unprecedented size. The greatest of these was the Basilica, a monstrous bronze behemoth nearly 30 feet long, capable of hurling stone balls weighing over half a ton. It was an engine of destruction designed for one purpose: to shatter the unbreakable walls. A vast naval fleet was assembled to blockade the city from the sea, completing the Iron Ring. The world held its breath. An age of stone was about to be assaulted by an age of fire. Within the city's hallowed walls, a different reality had taken hold. Emperor Constantine XI Palaiologos, a man who bore the name of the city's founder, prepared to lead its final, desperate defense. He was a noble and courageous leader, but his resources were tragically few. The once mighty Byzantine Empire had shrunk to little more than the city itself in a few scattered territories. He could muster barely 7,000 men, a handful of professional soldiers, citizen militia, and a small contingent of Genoese mercenaries. They were a sliver of an army, tasked with defending 14 miles of wall against a behemoth. Their hope was not in numbers, but in faith, in the resilience of their walls, and in the belief that God would not forsake his chosen city. On April 6, 1453, the storm broke. The great Ottoman cannons began their thunderous symphony of destruction. Day after day, the Basilica and its smaller brethren unleashed their fury, the ground shaking with each concussive blast. The air filled with a permanent haze of dust and sulfur. The mighty Theodosian walls, which had stood unyielding for a millennium, now began to crack and crumble under the relentless bombardment. The sound was a constant, soul-shaking roar that echoed through the city's streets, a drumbeat counting down the city's final days. The Ottoman forces focused their assault on the weakest sections of the wall, particularly the Lycus Valley. Wave after wave of soldiers charged, attempting to exploit the breaches created by the cannons. But the defenders, led by the emperor himself and the valiant Genoese commander Giovanni Giustiniani, fought with the ferocity of cornered lions. They met the attackers with swords, arrows, and Greek fire, the legendary incendiary weapon of the Byzantines. Each night, under the cover of darkness, a desperate, exhausted populace emerged. Men, women, and children worked with frantic energy, using rubble, wood, and earth to repair the gaping wounds in their walls before the sun rose to bring another day of hell. Yet, Mehmed's ingenuity was as formidable as his artillery. The entrance to the city's vital harbor, the Golden Horn, was blocked by a massive iron chain, preventing the Ottoman fleet from attacking the weaker sea walls. So the Sultan conceived a plan of breathtaking audacity. In a single night, his engineers constructed a greased timber roadway over the hill of Galata. Thousands of men and oxen, working in the torchlit darkness, dragged 70 of his warships over land, bypassing the chain completely. When the sun rose, the horrified defenders saw the Ottoman fleet floating in their supposedly secure harbor. It was a logistical miracle and a psychological masterpiece. The city was now completely surrounded. There was no escape. As the siege dragged on into its 7th week, despair began to curdle the air within Constantinople. The once vibrant markets were empty, food was scarce, and starvation became a silent, creeping enemy. The constant cannon fire had shattered not just the walls, but the morale of the people. Fear was a palpable presence, seen in the haunted eyes of children and the frantic prayers of the old. In the final hours, thousands gathered in the majestic Hagia Sophia, the great church of holy wisdom. Orthodox priests and Catholic cardinals, who had long been divided by schism, put aside their differences to lead one last, united prayer. Chants echoed beneath the vast dome as flickering candlelight illuminated mosaics of saints and emperors. It was a moment of sublime and tragic unity, a final plea for a miracle as the enemy gathered for the final blow. In the pre-dawn darkness of May 29, 1453, the attack began. Mehmed unleashed the final, all-out assault. The first wave, composed of irregular troops, was driven forward with a single purpose: to exhaust the defenders. They were repelled, but at great cost to the Byzantines' dwindling strength and ammunition. Then came the second wave, Anatolian regulars, who fought with greater discipline, but were also thrown back. For hours, the battle raged, a maelstrom of steel, fire, and blood. The defenders, fighting on pure adrenaline and desperation, held the line. But they were nearing the breaking point. Just before dawn, Mehmed unleashed his ultimate weapon, the Janissaries, the elite, fanatically loyal heart of his army. They advanced in disciplined columns, their relentless advance hammering against the last vestiges of Byzantine resistance. In the chaos of the main assault, a small contingent of Ottoman soldiers discovered a postern gate, the Kirkoporta, that had been left unbolted. It was a small oversight, a fatal human error in the fog of war. They slipped through, climbing a nearby tower and raising the Ottoman banner. Simultaneously, the Genoese commander Giustiniani was gravely wounded, and his evacuation from the front lines caused a panic among the remaining defenders. The line wavered, then broke. The Janissaries surged through the breach. The defense collapsed. Emperor Constantine XI, seeing that all was lost, cast aside his imperial regalia. He drew his sword, and with his last loyal men, plunged into the advancing tide of invaders, disappearing into the fray. He died as he had lived, the last Roman emperor, defending his city to the very end. The cry went up: "The city has fallen." Ottoman soldiers flooded through the gates and over the crumbled walls. For 3 days, as was the custom of the age, the city was given over to the victorious army. The accumulated wealth of 1,000 years was plundered. The streets that had once echoed with chants and commerce now rang with screams and the clash of steel. When the dust settled, Sultan Mehmed II, now known as the Conqueror, made his triumphant entry. He rode not as a destroyer, but as a new master. He proceeded directly to the Hagia Sophia, the heart of Byzantine Christianity. Dismounting, he stooped to scoop up a handful of earth, which he sprinkled over his turban in a gesture of humility before God. Inside, he ordered the great church to be converted into a mosque. The sound of the Islamic call to prayer echoed for the first time under its magnificent dome. The fall of Constantinople was not merely the end of a city. It was the end of an era. The Byzantine Empire, the 1,000-year-old Eastern Roman Empire, was extinguished forever. The event sent shockwaves across the Christian world, signaling a monumental shift in power. Scholars fleeing the city carried with them the precious knowledge of ancient Greece and Rome, helping to fuel the burgeoning Renaissance in Europe. But it also marked the symbolic end of the Middle Ages. A new power, the Ottoman Empire, now stood astride Europe and Asia. Its capital, the city it had conquered. The world had been remade. In the quiet halls of the Hagia Sophia, where Christian mosaics were now covered by Islamic calligraphy, one can still feel the weight of that momentous day, the silent, solemn echo of an empire's last breath and the dawn of a new world. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like and subscribe to Histalks AI.